Hello all. Let's continue our discussion with joints, and we're going to talk about one of those three major structural classifications, which are the fibrous joints. So first, we're just going to talk about how they're even characterized. There are three types of fibrous joints we're going to discuss, and we're going to talk about a few examples of each. Okay, so a fibrous joint. This type of joint is going to be, the bones are going to be joined by a solid mass of typically dense, irregular connective tissue. So remember, this is where you're going to have collagen fibers kind of extending from one bone, going the entire length over to the other bone. So there's no real space between the bones like we have in a synovial joint. Now, how much of that connective tissue is located between the joints will differ between the major types, and that will affect how much range of motion can occur. Either sometimes there's no movement whatsoever in some of the fibrous joints to a little bit more mobility, not quite as much as what you have in a synovial joint. So there are three major types, and we're going to talk about each one, starting with sutures. Sutures literally mean a seam. And we only have sutures associated with the skull. So these are going to be the joints between the bones of the skull, other than at the temporomandibular joint, which is an example of a synovial joint. The rest are going to be sutures. And the connective tissue that is going to bind between the bones is referred to as the sutural ligament. In juveniles, so individuals where the skull is still growing, this joint is going to be slightly movable. There's going to be a little bit more mobility there, but not very much. Certainly not what we have like in the synovial joint. Whereas with adults, there is no movement whatsoever in a suture. You don't want movement at these areas of the bone. In fact, with time, sometimes this ligament will be completely replaced with bone, and you just have a bone up against a bone. This is referred to as a synostosis. So it's not really bones rubbing up against one another. It just basically is going to be something that can naturally occur when we're talking about in the skull. So if you ever hear the term synostosis, this means a bony joint. This is one of the more common areas for this to occur. But this can occur in other areas of the body, particularly when we talk about when that growth plate is completely replaced in those cartilaginous joints. That's an example of a synostosis as well. Okay, another type of a fibrous joint is one of our more unique ones because it's going to be between bone and tooth. A tooth is not a bone, so this is a unique type of joint. This is referred to as a gomphosis or gomphoses if we're talking plural. And gompho literally means a bolt or a nail. So it's kind of like a nail, which is the tooth, kind of being hammered into the bone. Or sometimes you hear this referred to more as like a peg in a socket. So you put the peg, which is the tooth, into the socket. Now, the fibrous portion that's connecting the tooth and the bone is called the periodontal ligament, or the PDL. So you can see that here. So between the bone and the tooth throughout the entire region here. So this is a gomphosis, again, one of the more unique ones because it's not between a bone and a bone. And then last, and one of my personal favorites, are going to be the syndesmoses or syndesmoses if we're talking plural. And syndesmo means a band. So really the fibrous connective tissue between the bones is going to be more like a band-aid basically between the two bones, and they're going to be longer. Okay, so you can see that here. This is between the radius and the ulna, which are in your forearm, and this band of connective tissue is going to be longer between those two bones. And when you have a bit more distance between the bones and you have a longer connective tissue, this will allow for a bit more mobility than what we had, say, with the sutures or with the gomphosis. A lot of times there's going to be various syndesmoses, but typically the one that gets the most talk is the interosseous membranes. So you have one here in the forearm, you'll have one in the leg as well. All right, excellent. So I kind of teed you up on this one. So that interosseous membrane between the tibia and the fibula, so that's in the leg, is an example of which type of fibrous joint. Is it a gomphosis? Is it a suture? Is it a syndesmosis? Pause the video if you need to, but I think you probably are on the same page with me as C is the correct answer. A syndesmosis, interosseous membranes are an excellent example of that. The two major examples are in the forearm between the radius and ulna, and the leg between the tibia and the fibula. Obviously, we'll talk a lot more about these bones in upcoming videos. A gomphosis is between a tooth and bone, so no. And a suture is only located in the skull, so that wouldn't make any sense when talking about the tibia and the fibula. Okay, excellent. So that was a lot of fibrous joint fun. Now let's move on to cartilaginous joints. Thanks for your time.